Hello and welcome to the fifth session of the Museum Future Summit. I'm Afzal Khan, your host for the day. This session is called Critical Reflection, the Importance of Evaluation. First up, we will hear about the Somerset House Future Producer Programme with Errol Donald, Creative Leadership Coach and founder of Mindspray, and Natalya Best Forbes, Inclusive Talent Programme Manager at Somerset House Trust. Lastly, Naomi Salinas Burton, Museum Futures Programme Manager at the British Museum, will share some of the things that the Museum Futures Programme learned the hard way. A live Q&A with speakers will follow the presentation, so please use the Q&A function in Zoom to send through your questions. For now, I will hand over to our first speakers, Errol and Natalya.
Hey Errol, fancy seeing you here.
Hey Talia, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm looking forward to our chat today. So yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with who the future producers are and the intentions for the programme. So Somerset House launched the Future Producer Programme back in September 2020 and had a small cohort at that point, which were working on our first co-production, Decentralised, with a collective within Somerset House called Kamuzi. We were then welcomed another cohort in December 2020, and they were working on our second co-production, Hope in the Heat, with Superflux, which is a studio artist that we have. What was great for both of these co-productions and kind of the start of this programme was that both cohorts joined immediately into an actual programme and an actual, something to do rather than just kind of sitting around. And the aim for the programme was to provide, a freelance opportunity for 2 years for people between the ages of 18 and 30 who are underrepresented in the cultural sector. And we wanted to make sure that they gained skills and experience and were producing content and work in line with Somerset House's cultural programme. All the intentions were great, and we were doing well. I'd say about mid 2021, we felt that we weren't really reaching kind of where we were hoping it would be. And I guess I thought about this a lot, and the reasons behind that were that optimistically, I think we thought that COVID would be in a better place and be more manageable. But actually, at that point, we were still doing a lot of online work. There was kind of the map of going back into the world was kind of halted and kind of moved around. Deadlines were changing and opening up was changing. And I think that just brought about more worries throughout our workforce and about job stability. And being young going into the arts, it's nerve-wracking as it is, especially when you've got a pandemic. We also had a number of staff changes between January and August 2021, and that meant that we had a reduced team at some points. And then I think kind of coupled with all of this, there was a breakdown in communication and project creep and, I guess kind of worries about, readjusting really into the world that we were in, and everyone was trying to make it work. But through this kind of breakdown of communication, we kind of found that it was leading to more of a distance and a kind of us and them kind of vibe, I guess, and the lack of trust. So I guess when you kind of coupled all of that together, we got to about September 2021 and it all kind of came to a head, and there was frustration, there was anger, there was worries, there was feeling like people aren't being heard, and, felt like there was a breakdown in where our program should be at, and we were unsure about where we could take it next. And I guess that's when Dictioner, our head of engagement skills, and Jonathan, the director of Somerset House, came together and brought you in, Errol. So
yeah, and that was October, I think. October.
Mm-hmm. About that, yeah.
So I've been on maybe a similar journey to some of the future producers in terms of going into an institution as a young person, but that was yonks ago. So I was sort of very mindful that their journey was not my journey, but also that my journey would at least sort of make me more compassionate to, you know, what they were experiencing. But yeah, my background is in the arts, both as a practitioner and as a commissioner. So I think I was able to hold both the young person's or young people's experiences, as well as the intention of the program in terms of getting them ready for the world of work. So I was really excited, actually, because, you know, having worked with young people, that's pretty much what I do by day. So it was a great opportunity for me. Also because, you know, unfortunately, I don't think the sex has changed radically, or certainly the rate of change hasn't been enough, or hasn't moved on enough. So yeah, I shared the intention for the program in terms of wanting it to create this space within the sector for young people from backgrounds typically not given access to the arts more generally. And that sort of initially started with a briefing from the director of Somerset House, and that told me that it was being held at senior level. I think also then having individual conversations with the young people was really important, because it gave me an opportunity to, you know, find out what their expectation was, but also find out what they were passionate about. And that was really important, because I feel that individualism is really important. Yes, you know, you've got this program that is steering people towards a singular intention, but they're all individuals, and sometimes the program, or there may be points where the program doesn't necessarily work for them. And that's also really important to recognize, that actually sometimes things just don't work in the arts. I
think where we were at as well, we were like, is this going to work? Is this program going to work?
Exactly. But yeah, it's really important to kind of understand where they were, and also give them that space to talk as individuals. I would imagine they would have had group discussions, but just have those individual discussions as well. Also met with senior leadership as well, and having the space to do that and listen to you, and also ask challenging questions was also good. And I did the same when I brought the young people together. We were holding group discussions. And yes, a lot of it was around listening, but a lot of it was around reflecting back what people were saying, and maybe inviting them to look at things in different ways. And a lot of stuff came up, a lot of material came up, but that wasn't necessarily directly related to the future of the program. It was more personal, but equally, I felt it was important for all of that stuff to just be discussed in an open and honest space. And I think that was at the heart of it all for me. It was not just communication, but it was really about getting our fingers underneath some of the issues which the sector has typically either ignored or found difficult to grapple with, because they just don't have the right people in place. And so that's one of the big things about this program as well, is that, you know, from the top down, you know, there are people who are in positions to affect that change. So yeah, having those discussions and then getting to a point where I could make the recommendations was great. It was great.
I think you've kind of hit nail on the head on a couple of things as well, like having it be seen as an organizational kind of element to resolve rather than a department element to resolve made all the difference. And having our directorate kind of there, you know, on the front line, talking to you, talking to me, getting their words across was really important. I think as well, for us, it was important that you were the person we did, because it wasn't about just getting any evaluator in. It's about getting someone in who actually would relate to the future producers, and they felt they could speak honestly and openly with. And, you know, those group discussions, I think, was a big moment. I mean, personally, for me, watching them speak so openly, because we tried these discussions in the past and they just felt like we weren't getting 100%. And that was the first time in a long time I felt that we kind of had a breakthrough. And that was you.
Yeah.
But I guess as well, you know, you gave us realistic options on where to go next, and mediated, I guess, to some degree as well, which, you know, meant that everyone was in a better and more open place. And those options weren't just for Somerset House, they were for everyone to kind of discover, you know, and look through together. And, you know, I think the reason why we're in a much better place now is because we're doing things that came off of the recommendation of those evaluations, like one-to-ones and having those personal discussions rather than group meetings constantly. And we sat down and we've redone our contract and done a slide deck to kind of accompany it. And that was kind of critiqued and gone through with all the future producers, so that their kind of points and their power in that is kind of translated. So yeah, I think we're in a much better space thanks to the evaluation. I think the importance of evaluation, going back to kind of why we're here, is that our program is in a much stronger place. We see longevity in our program, and, you know, ultimately the participants are a lot happier and a lot more committed to this program, I feel, than they were 6 months ago.
Yeah, I think that maybe speaks to the kind of restoration or them reclaiming a sense of power and agency. You know, I think coming into an institution or a space where typically they're not welcomed or they don't feel comfortable, you know, there was a sense from me that they experienced a loss of power. And I think there was an opportunity for me to actually just reflect back at them and say, you have that agency, and there's an opportunity not just for your voice to be heard, but to be heard in the right places, and for not just for you to be part of the discussion, but for you to lead the discussion or discussions. So I think there's just something about programs like this where you have to look at the structural inequalities in an honest way, and recognize or be able to facilitate a kind of leveling of the playing field in real time, which is not always possible when you've got deadlines and you've got funding expectations, etc., etc.
I mean, we brought in a steering group to help with that. So that was one of your recommendations, where they, you know, work with me directly, but then also speak to directorate when kind of right to discuss change. So again, that's that power in there, you know. But I'm conscious we've got less than 25 seconds left on the clock, and you and I could talk about this all day long. But I just want to say thanks for everything you've done. And looking forward to answering some questions from everyone at the talk.
Thank you, and yeah, no doubt catch up soon.
Take care.
Bye.
See you in a bit.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello, my name is Naomi. I'm the Museum Futures Program Manager at the British Museum. Museum Futures is a 3-year traineeship funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund as part of the Skills for the Future traineeship scheme. Over 3 cohort years, we trained 25 trainees at 21 host organizations. And trainees all worked on digital skills-based projects related to museum collections. And trainees met up monthly when COVID permitted at a different host organization to share skills and learnings about their individual projects in museums. All trainees also work towards a practical qualification, a cultural heritage diploma. And roughly half of the trainees continue to work in museums and heritage after completing their placement year. In December 2021, our final cohort of trainees completed their placements. So now we are working to share some of our learnings through the summit and through our internal and external evaluation. We worked with external evaluators Shirley Collier and Alex Lindley, who were excellent. And before I get into some key learnings, I wanted to share a few of my working assumptions about evaluation. So you are all here. I assume you agree that evaluation is important. It's not only necessary for most funding, but it's a useful tool, so I think we should use it. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on how many people would read a summative final report for a fixed term funded project. The Museum Futures report is about 50 pages. I'm hoping a handful of people read it, and I think that is okay, because I don't believe the glossy, sweet smelling report is the main thing for evaluation. The main thing is all that learning and participatory process that led you to iterate and improve activities. Put that in other words, I believe formative evaluation during projects is as or more important than the summative final evaluation. And that funders are rarely the ones to change project plans. It's the staff, the partners, the participants that can improve projects based on their own experience. And we generally don't change or improve our plans when we think everything is successful. We improve, we change when we know the things that don't work. So this is my aim for evaluation, learning from failure. We need to write project plans that can be adaptable, and we need to empower program staff to speak up when things aren't working. So in order to maximize the people who can learn from failure of Museum Futures, I have 6 hard lessons to share with you now. There's a lot more, but I'm hoping these things will help you in your current and future projects, whether that's apprenticeships, traineeships, fellowships, young freelancers, etc. So our first learning from failure is that trainees are not employees. At least at the British Museum, trainees were not employed by the British Museum or their host organization. They're on contracts of training. The benefits of this are that they can be paid a tax-free bursary, so there are some cost savings. It's also written into their contract that their focus is training over work outputs. Partners are often more willing to trial different recruitment methods when recruiting for trainees than employees. But the learning from failure came when trainees needed extra support. For example, they struggled in their role or needed extra time off, or if there was just a global pandemic in the middle of their placement year, we just didn't have HR or systems in place that could support this. So if you're thinking of starting a traineeship, do look at various models, and there are a few at the summit. For example, Norfolk Museum Service Teaching Museum, they hire trainees as employees of the council. And then Somerset House have young freelancers, but they also have dedicated HR support for those roles. Our next learning from failure is trainees are not staff development opportunities. And I'm going to quote from our final report. Supervisors should be chosen for their previous track record in relationship building and people management. So this image of a supervisor and trainee at the British Museum is a great example of the magic that can happen when a skilled manager supports a brand new museum worker. Now, Museum Futures did have some incredible first-time people managers that really stepped up to the role of trainee supervisor, and I can't thank them enough. But we didn't require partner museums to allow supervisors the extra time and capacity it takes to manage trainees. And we learned the hard way that there needs to be better options, and this is sector-wide, to upskill museum staff in management and supervision. The third key learning is about recruitment, and I learned so much about recruitment. This could be its own summit. And I learned from working with partners like Norfolk Museum Service and National Football Museum, so I'm really glad that they led a session on this earlier today. But I'll try to simplify, and I'll say that we set a very lofty project aim to diversify the sector. And with that, we had program-wide targets for underrepresentation around age and educational attainment. And our evaluation found that it would be really helpful to clarify whether our recruitment was positive action. So for example, addressing a protected characteristic like age, or was it more inclusive, accessible recruitment? So for example, targeting a group which is underrepresented in the museum sector, but doesn't have protected characteristics, so something like educational attainment. One thing we did to address this was to provide training through Creative Access, who are also part of the summit. And that really helped, but I think there's a lot more that can be done to train the sector inside and outside of human resources on what positive action is and how to use it, and inclusive methods of recruitment, especially with traineeships and apprenticeships. Our fourth learning was that the qualification must match the work that trainees are doing. This trainee in this image is at the Museum of Cardiff, which was closed due to COVID for most of their traineeship year. So their work was entirely remote, and that was a huge challenge to evidencing the really practical criteria of the Cultural Heritage Diploma. But even before COVID, trainees had always been working on innovative digital projects, and we were having to try and match that with the Cultural Heritage Diploma that really hasn't changed in 10 years. So we learned that programs must work with their awarding bodies to make sure their qualifications are accessible, reflective of modern digital museum practices, and that the qualification criteria can be easily matched to trainees' placements activities. Our fifth learning is that repeat partners maximize this learning from failure. This image shows a group of trainees visiting the Museum of East Anglian Life, which is one of the few organizations that hosted a trainee in multiple cohort years. They also hosted trainees through another Skills for the Future program. And all that learning, especially their learning from failure, even though they were amazing partners, I think it helped them to now host a dozen or so Kickstart trainees. So our evaluation recommends considering building in 2+ year traineeship commitments to deepen organizational learning. Also build in more time for the recruitment process to support deeper engagement with community partners and prospective applicants. So if you repeat partners, if you repeat people who are supporting the project year over year, those are all people that will be able to learn from your evaluation and improve and iterate. So here are just a few of the things that we learned from the 3 years of Museum Futures. And there, again, there's a lot more, and I will share the final report with everyone here today. And I called this presentation The Failure of Museum Futures to sort of normalize honest evaluation and recognize that there were challenges. But I also want to recognize that we accomplished a lot, and I'm in awe of the fact that no program partner or trainee dropped out despite COVID-19 and everything. And it's a reason we wanted to put on this summit to celebrate with partners that have continued to expand access to the heritage and cultural sector. So a big thank you to everyone who supported Museum Futures and to everyone who was watching.
Thank you very much to all of our presenters. These presentations are so different, but they show how evaluation can meet different needs. So that's pretty awesome. I'm just going to kick off the Q&A straight away. And the first question is for Chris. You spoke honestly about your research for a magical qualification. How has this impacted your development of the apprenticeship?
Yes, the search for the magical perfect qualification. I should mention that every trainee who has applied for FMARA has been successful, and overall the Bridging the Digital Gap traineeships have accomplished what they set out to do, but it was ambitious because digital archiving does sit at this intersection between archival practice and technology. And I think I now realize that it needed to cross over the road more and understand the technological landscape, particularly if the people you're recruiting are on that side of the road. And the assessment had to be meaningful for them as well as for the sector. So for the new traineeships, the new apprenticeships, digital archiving is embedded as part of the broader range of skills and knowledge that are required to become an archivist or a records manager. And I think this is the way to go, that digital archiving should not be made something separate, that it should be embedded across your daily practice. And this will help, I think, in the assessment because it will give the apprentices a sort of a broader experience to reflect upon, a broader learning to reflect upon in the assessments, rather than really trying to talk about quite specific technical tasks.
Thank you very much for that. I just got a quick question for Ryan. Thank you very much for joining us for the Q&A. As a future producer at Somerset House, is there anything you want to share about your experience?
Yeah, sure. Am I on mute? Oh, can everyone hear me?
We can hear you, it's fine.
Okay, cool. So great. So basically, yeah, I think at the start, we came in, obviously it was advertised, as intentions of what was going to happen, but then like explained in the video, the communication got lost, and then the trust started to, we started to lose trust because our needs wasn't being met. But overall, I would say the programs, in terms of the programs, they were really good. I'm not going to completely write off everything because we had there were highlights in the moments. For example, like there was community, there was no comply. And yeah, there was a lot of highlights, but also at the same time, like, again, there was challenges as well. So I think in terms of the program right now, where we're at the moment, I think we're in a good space. I think where our needs are being heard, but also the best thing about it is, even though when we did all those projects, I think the thing that was missing was our own projects. So now, like, we're doing our own things, but Somerset House is supporting it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah. That's perfect. Thank you very much. There's a quick question for Somerset House, the team in general, I guess. Your discussion clearly showed the importance of having the right external evaluator to come in and enable staff and participants to reflect honestly and openly on their experiences. How did you go about recruiting for Errol's role?
That's probably one for me. It was a bit of using our own networks. Dictioner, who is the head of engagement and skills at Somerset House, worked with Jonathan Reiki, who's our director, to think about who would be kind of the right person. For us, it was really important, as we said in the video, that it was someone who wouldn't just resonate with the trust, but also kind of understood young people, had worked with young people, and allowed that space for people to feel comfortable being completely upfront and honest. Ultimately we went through kind of our own networks, but I think the importance of it was, really thinking about, evaluation happens a lot at Somerset House and that's brilliant, but it was thinking about, who do we know that could really get the outcome that we were hoping for. And that happened to be Errol.
Anything you want to add to that, Errol?
Nope. I think there is something about recruitment, as kind of maybe alluded to earlier on, is that it really does depend on the strength of your engagement with the communities or the groups or the audiences that you're trying to engage with. So it's, I know when recruitment processes start, there's a defined period of time, and there's something about utilizing the budget, within a defined period of time. So I think there's something for organisations to consider what outreach actually means, because it just can't purely be based on the recruitment exercise.
Yeah, that's perfect. I guess this would be the final question. I'd be really interested to hear more about the panelists' views on the values of including a diploma or formal qualifications in traineeship schemes. What value, if any, do they bring, or are they just an add-on to a traineeship? Anybody want to take a crack at that?
I can attempt to take a crack at it, because I think this has been sort of a reoccurring theme that's come up in a lot of the sessions. Is just sort of this debate that's going on with people who are trying to increase access to the sector, and it's a sector that really values higher education, and it values, traditional undergraduate degrees and museum studies degrees. I was coming at it from a perspective of like, we got to get these trainees something to put on their CVs so they can actually compete with all of these people who have, history undergrads or MA, museum studies. And what I've learned is like, it might not be the best path for everyone, but I still think that there was incredible value in offering that cultural heritage diploma to our trainees, because I do think it looks really good on the CV. But aside from that, gave them a way to reflect on everything that they were learning in that, because they only had a year, and some of them only had a year where they were mostly working remotely. So doing the evidencing of the cultural heritage diploma allowed them time to reflect and have to provide evidence for those practical units. And so they were able to say, like, I know how to, meet this unit on conservation or preservation or community engagement or whatever. And they gave them that language so that they could really rock interviews as well, and sort of be able to compete in the kind of competitive cultural heritage sector. So I still think there's value, but I also really enjoyed Chris's presentation, because it's really hard to try to find a vocational qualification that will match an undergraduate degree in some level. And I know that places like Culture and have just sort of decided, actually, we're going to give our trainees the equivalent of a higher education diploma, because that's what we have been asking for. So I hear that too.
Yeah, we have had some comments in the chat resonating with Chris on the subject of vocational qualifications. Someone says, it does seem to be a more widespread issue than I think the sector has been able to act on. And it is really interesting to see it as a theme in this session. Anybody want to add anything to that? Yeah, Chris, yeah.
So I could just say that one of the things, I absolutely agree with everything that Naomi just said, but also one of these things, and I have sort of floated this idea to our trainees, is to what extent they wanted to spend part of their week studying. So, if we did say, okay, we're going to fund a postgraduate diploma or something. And I got a real mixed response. I got people who said, hey, I'm done with studying. I really wanted something practical where I could apply my skills. And then other people said, oh yeah, okay, no, I would have done that because I would have seen, like Naomi's saying, I would have seen that qualification at the end, so that would have given me that competitive edge. And it was almost split down the middle.
Yeah. Sadly, we are almost out of time. I would love to carry on this conversation. I think there's so much more to be said. But thank you very much to our panelists for their brilliant presentations. And thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.